Howdy folks, today we are going to gut this control panel from my ALP 4K and install this very awesome graphic from the guys at Buy Stuff Arcades. One of the first things that I would suggest you guys do is make sure that you save at least the styrofoam from your packaging. It comes in handy when we're doing work. Obviously fits the joystick real well. So that would be one of my first suggestions. Another one, label your stuff. I suffer from CRS. I can't remember stuff. So labeling everything and having it nice and easy to read is probably one of the better things that you can do. I'm a big fan of my P-Touch. I got some labels here that we're going to label the top and bottom of the joystick. So when we pull it all apart and put it back together, we can do that. So I'm going to get some stuff repositioned here and then we'll get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to label the top of the joystick. This way we know which direction it should go back in. The next is going to be the buttons here. So we're just going to start pulling these out. You got to find the little clasp in there to get these to pop off. If by chance you're having a tough time doing it, grab a small screwdriver. You can push on the pin, and if you do it right, it pops right off. Some of these are already loose for me, but we're going to just keep popping these off one by one. And I already started working on some of them. At this point, I'm going to pause the video and I'll get these all pulled out. I'll show you how to remove the buttons. So I don't know if you can see this here, but there's this little tab right here that you just push on it and it will loosen up the connector and these will pop right off. So next step here is just to get these buttons out. So grab your tightener, loosener, and just nice and easy. And then you can just loosen these up. And the protector, styrofoam protector, will catch the buttons for you as you loosen them up. Again, I'll spare you the boring parts of watching me to remove all of these buttons. So once I get these out, we'll come back and go on with the next step. Now that we have the buttons removed, we can start on the joystick. Get the flathead screwdriver here, drop it in the slot, hold it in place, and start turning the ball. Once the ball is loose enough, you can just put your finger back here to hold it and spin the ball till it pops off. Be mindful of the dust covers because they're going to come with it. That's done. Now we'll pull the screws. Be careful of the exciters. I personally don't use them, but we also don't want them popping off as part of the project. So screws are out. Now the joystick's out. Last but not least, we need to remove the trackball. This part's a little bit more involved, but we'll get it done. Next step is removing the 4 screws. So I'm going to stop the camera here. We'll come back after the screws are removed and we'll go over the next steps. Okay, now the screws have been removed. We're going to go ahead and pull my gaffer's tape. I'm a big fan of gaffer's tape. It's like duct tape, but it doesn't leave the nasty residue behind. So go ahead and get that out of here. And then this whole piece comes off. Now you'll notice in here I've got an LED. Essentially, I wanted a backlight for my trackball, so we threw an LED kit in here. It's covered in one of the other videos. Lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to pull this connector right here. Don't use the wires to pull it out. Get some nails in there. If you can't wiggle it out with your nails, you could use a pair of needle nose or something like that. With this out, we have 4 screws that we've got to get to here, because in the front, we have this piece here that locks the trackball in place. So what we need to do is remove these screws, and then the trackball will come out, and then it'll allow us to remove the trackball assembly. I've loosened the other screws. We're on the last one now. You're going to need to use a small screwdriver to get in there, to get to these screws down there. They are quite small, but once you loosen it up, the trackball will drop out. You can then remove the assembly and the ball, get it out of your way. Now we've got to pull these 4 screws to pull the assembly out. I'm going to pause and we'll come back after that and we'll go over next steps. With the screws removed, we can simply lift the trackball assembly out of the way. One last thing we need to do is we need to cut this wire tie. This wire tie is the only thing that is keeping us from pulling everything out. We've got another one over here we got to get rid of. Once we cut those out, we can now take everything away. And the only thing that we're left with is the haptics. Again, we'll just take my gaffer's tape. We'll neaten up the wires so they're out of the way. We will then flip this over, clean it up, and then get started with applying the graphic. So now that we've got everything repositioned, one of the things that I want to do is clean this real good. I like to use Screen Mom and a lint-free rag to clean everything up. We'll just spray it on there, keep it off the graphic, and we'll wipe it down real good. It's best to use lint-free because lint obviously is detrimental to our graphic. So we'll get this dried off real good, cleaned up real good, and we'll move on to the next step, which is applying the graphic. So here's the graphic laid out. I've pulled all the perforated pieces out to make it easier to line everything up. A few things that you're going to need is some blue tape, maybe a vinyl roller, definitely the squeegee. You want to make sure that you get all the bubbles out. Again, this one's tight, so I have a little wiggle room, but some of the other graphics that they sell, you can put right over top of the buttons without having to go through all this. I'm going to get this laid out here. Come back once it's laid out how I want, and we'll move on from there. Okay, with the graphic laid out, we can get started with actually laying it. One of the other pieces that I neglected to mention was a cutter. You're going to need something to kind of cut this down the middle as you're working. So we're going to peel this back. All right, so we're going to peel it back to about here. All right, I'm going to take a piece of blue tape. Just for a moment, I'm going to hold down the corner. Just like that. And then we're going to take our cutter here, hopefully it works, and we're going to cut right through here. Just like that, nice and clean and easy. Then we're going to lay this part of the graphic down. We're going to go as tight as we can. Try to work out those bubbles. All right, so just like that, nice and easy. Maybe grab that roller, go over it with the roller. Now we can pull the blue tape. and finish the rest of the graphic. Just like that. Try to work quick here so I don't bore you guys. All right, now we can come over here, pull the graphic off, hold it by the center here, lay it flat, just like that. And then again, work out those bubbles, make sure that it's tight. Go over it with the roller. Again, just get all those bubbles out if there are any. I think it looks pretty good. We'll get back into putting it all back together. As I was getting ready to assemble it, I noticed that the graphic kind of overlaid this area here. And so what we would want to do, either get yourself an X-Acto knife or use the razor knife that comes with your kit. And in this case, we're just going to try to cut around it like that. The X-Acto knife, in my opinion, would be a little bit easier to use just because you can kind of get some precision with it. So just kind of work yourself around it. Cut it out so you can get that trackball guard back in. And just like that, we should be good to go. Again, make sure that if you do have to cut anything out, you roll it. You make sure that there's no bubbles or that the graphic isn't peeling up. You'll notice that as I'm wheeling around here, there's some flex, and that's from the area where the haptic feedback speakers are. So now we will start with getting everything put back together. I think I will start with getting the trackball in place. Then we'll trim this if we need to, and we'll kind of go from there. So now that we've got everything flipped around, we're going to start working backwards. We're going to reinstall the trackball, then the joystick, then the buttons. I'm going to stop here while I screw this down, and then we'll come back when we actually install the trackball. When you're reinstalling a trackball assembly, just make sure that the connector piece is up on top. Sometimes that's a common mistake when putting this back in. Now we're going to go ahead and flip this over, and we're going to make sure that the ball drops in there nice. But the other thing we need to do is make sure that the assembly piece goes back in and that everything spins nice. So we'll go ahead and flip it over one more time, and we'll kind of set this a little kitty corner so it holds the piece in place. We'll put the screws back in. We'll come back when that's done. Okay, so now we're going to get started putting the joystick back in. I pulled the tape here so all the wiring is out of the way for the haptics. Nice and easy. We're going to make sure that the top is at the top. Go ahead and lock that into place there. I'm not going to bore you with watching me screw stuff down. So we'll come back after everything is screwed into place, and we'll put the joystick ball back on. Okay, now it's time to reinstall the joystick ball. Make sure you put your dust covers back on, put the ball back on, and spin it down all the way. And then when it gets tight, grab your screwdriver and just give it a turn, maybe half a turn. Make sure it's nice and tight. And now our joystick's done. Things are looking pretty good. Upside down, but looking pretty good. Next, we'll start taking care of those buttons. All right, so we're going to get the buttons back in. Does anybody remember in what color order they went? I had to go back and look at a picture to make sure I knew. So we're going with the yellow, red, blue, like we had set up before. Again, just pop it in. Whichever direction you want them to face, it's up to you. Before I had them this way, I think I'm going to just put them this way this time. We'll install one of the buttons. So we get it installed here. We grab the tightener, give it a half a turn, quarter turn. You're good to go. I'll install the rest and then we'll come back. With the buttons now in place, we can start wiring everything up, make things a little bit easier. We're going to start by putting the board back on here. Now, keep in mind there are two little pins here, so make sure that they line up. They can snap pretty easy, so be careful. Does anybody know what direction, what buttons are what? It's easy. CBA and ZYX. So since I have everything labeled here, I'm not going to bore you with plugging everything in. I'll plug these in, we'll get this screwed down, and then we'll take a look at what it looks like completely assembled. As you can see here, everything is now wired up, ready to go. We put the wiring back in for the trackball. We've got the wiring in for my LED for the trackball. You'll notice that I cut out the haptic feedback wiring. I'm never going to use it. I was never a fan. So I figured, well, let's clean up the clutter and get rid of it. Last thing to do is check out what this sucker looks like. As Johnny Lawrence says, I think this is pretty badass. I think it looks great. Links to all the pieces that I used will be in the description. Like, subscribe, especially if you found this helpful. Thanks, everybody.